Pay heed, all who enter. Beware this podcast. Evidently, I guess, listen, I was trying to decide if I wanted to do the usual introduction, but you know who needs to pay heed? Apparently we do. We need to pay heed to Illinois. Put some respect on their name. We're going to be talking about that plenty more as Kansas loses to Illinois right now on the Pay Heed Podcast.
Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible.
This is the Pay Heed Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network, a live edition, our first ever live edition, and it's coming in a bit of a somber mood here as Kansas football goes on the road against Illinois and loses 23-17. I'm Nick Springer here with Kevin Flaherty. We're going to talk about it, break it all down, try to figure out where things went wrong and if Kansas can recover at the start of this season to still maybe achieve some of the goals that they've outlined for themselves. If you were watching live on YouTube, feel free to drop in the comments and share your thoughts as how you thought where things went wrong, and we'll react to them live here on the show. And if you're listening after the fact, you can always hit up the KCSN Mint Mobile text line if you want to join in the conversation at 913-407-6524. So lots of ways to get involved, lots of ways to share your thoughts on what has happened tonight on the Saturday for KU on the road at Illinois. So, Kevin, I mean, I don't even know. Where do you want to start, man? I mean, a disaster for KU. They lose 23-17. I'll just give you the floor here and kind of let you guide this to start off as to where you want to go and as to what went wrong for KU in this game.
Yeah, I think there are multiple questions that you kind of want to ask, right? And one of them is Jalen Daniels okay? You know, he was, kind of grimacing. It looked like he was maybe holding the arm a little bit. A lot of the throws came out short, Nick, and you saw him kind of hitch up a little bit when trying to get rid of the ball. And you think about it, too, he's usually been a fairly solid deep ball thrower. All of his throws down the field were kind of on a line where even if he cleared the cornerback, there wasn't going to be much of a window for the receiver to make a catch. Something was off there. And the second part of that question is, if your quarterback's struggling, whether it's injury, whether it's, hey, this dude just doesn't have it tonight, like pitchers sometimes, hey, this guy's stuff just isn't here tonight. Kansas dominated this game up front, Nick, and some people may look at that and think, oh my gosh, like that's taking it too far. If you would have told me before the game that Illinois would rush for 79 yards at 2.3 yards per carry and throw for less than 200 yards, I would have chalked that up as an absolute Kansas blowout. And you look at how effective Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw were. You look at the fact that they only had 21 carries between them on a night when maybe it felt like Devin Neal by himself should have approached 21, maybe even topped that, been up to 25 type carries with the way he was seeing the field, the cuts that he was making. I think situationally there were some things. You think about the possession in the fourth quarter where Kansas gets the ball back. They're up 17-13. Devin Neal runs for 7 yards on first down. It's okay to go back to Devin Neal at that point. And I think instead you wind up with two kind of shot plays, which hadn't really been effective all game long. Kansas winds up going 3 and out, kicking the ball back. That's kind of when Illinois made their move in that game. The turnovers are obviously something that everybody's going to circle and put exclamation points next to. But along with the turnovers, it felt like coaches talk a lot about playing complementary football. And in this game where Kansas's defense was so good, it felt like the complement to the way the defense was playing was to say, okay, enough with throwing the ball down the field, especially with low percentage shot plays. Let's give the ball to these running backs and let them rock and roll to victory.
Yeah, I think some people will get concerned about overusing Devin Neal or sort of managing him, right? But there have been games in the past in Devin Neal's career where it has been very clear this guy needs to get the ball, right?
Yeah.
I think back to that game against Oklahoma State in which he got 32 carries for over 200 yards and really dominated the game, right? This game tonight felt like it was supposed to be one of those games where, okay, nothing else is really working. Jalen is struggling. Let's give the ball to Devin Neal and let him go to work. And it just didn't happen for KU for whatever reason. Aaron, I think, brings up a great point here about running the ball more, right? I think that's kind of what you touched on there as well, Kevin, is, hey, Kansas was really controlling line of scrimmage. They were running the ball well, and they just didn't really go to it that much with Jeff Grimes. Yeah, with the Devin Neal or with the Jalen Daniels point, I don't really know what to make of that, because to me, especially later in the game, there was a number of throws where it looked like he was basically trying to put his whole body into the throw, and it still wasn't getting to where he was trying to get it to. So
I saw the same thing.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous about that. There was a play early in the game where he kind of got up a little bit gingerly. I don't know if he tweaked something there, but he certainly was not himself. Obviously, 3 interceptions in the game, a couple of underthrown balls, some bad decision-making. It's really hard to explain what went on with Jalen tonight for KU, because he was really kind of off from the beginning, and it just never really clicked. I mean, just a really, really poor performance from him. And yeah, I think really what kind of compounds that is the fact that it was pretty clear throughout the night that Jalen Daniels didn't quite have it fully on, and yet Kansas continued to go back to him and try to make him, or force him to try to make a play. And when you have a team as talented as Kansas does, we've talked about this in the past, at the skill positions around, what that allows you to do is that on a game in, game out basis, it can be different guys who are sort of the player of the game, right? For you, right?
Sure.
It doesn't have to be Luke Grimm every game. It doesn't have to be Lawrence Arnold every game. It doesn't have to be Devin Neal every game. But each game, you want one of those guys. And again, the way this game kind of played out, it lined up perfectly for Devin Neal and or Daniel Highshaw to have that type of game. And for whatever reason, Kansas was really determined to push the ball down the field at certain times when it didn't make a ton of sense. You mentioned that drive when they were up 4. It's on a 3rd and 3, you run basically just a go ball for no reason. It felt like down the far sideline. So yeah, I don't know. I have some concerns about Jalen's health. I mean, obviously he played through the game. He's a very, very tough individual. I think I don't want anyone to really jump on him about his injuries or his injury history, but you almost have to scratch your head a little bit and do consider, was something off with him tonight because of kind of how the game played out, and really how he was not able to just fully get the ball to a lot of times where he was trying to get it. So I don't know. It's a very disappointing loss. It's very frustrating. It's one that Kansas, I think, is going to be beating themselves about throughout the rest of the season. But it's game 2, right? I think the other thing I wanted to bring up here is and we've touched on this in the preseason. Kansas has over 30 seniors on this roster, right?
Yep.
So this is not like you were on the road with a young team and you lost composure. This is a team that has veterans across the board at all 3 levels of the defense. Everywhere on offense you look, you have a senior who's played plenty. So that is a real concern that they were unable to kind of bring it together. I think another main storyline of this game, Kevin, that I want to dive into with you here is Jeff Grimes.
Sure.
The play calling, I think, was drawing a lot of attention early in the game. There was a lot of screen passes utilized. Eventually, Illinois picked up on that. It led to a pick 6 that really flipped the game, right? I think you talked about some of the plays in the second half. That's really kind of the frustration, is that there's so many different points throughout the game where KU had a chance to kind of capitalize and really regain control, and they never did that. They never did it. And
well, I mean, when the announcer is saying before that play, like, watch out for the screen pass here, and then Illinois picks it in and takes it in for 6, it's not the best optics, right? It would have been bad if it were a pick 6 anyway, but the fact that the announcer's sitting there and saying, hey, watch out for this play, and then that's exactly what you did. But to that point, Nick, I felt like there wasn't a lot of variation in the passing game tonight. And when you look at the strength of guys like LJ Arnold and Luke Grimm and guys like that, it's what I would call that intermediate plus, right? It's not necessarily the deep ball, but it's not necessarily, hey, take a bubble screen and make somebody miss it and make something happen either. And whether it was what Grimes was calling or what Jalen Daniels was throwing, and I need to go back and watch the tape to see, hey, was the intermediate play there and Jalen just didn't take it to try and make something happen? All of those are fair questions. I think the flip side of that is what we already talked about. If it's on Grimes, if it's on Jalen Daniels, whatever reason, at some point you have to look at it and say, the pathway here is pretty simple. hand the ball off and hand the ball off specifically to Devin Neal and with the way that he was playing. And I think that's the most frustrating part when you look at it is the defense played an absolute whale of a game and they wound up struggling through the fourth quarter. Well, that's something that, maybe would have been a little bit different had you continued to run the ball at a higher rate. And I would have understood too if it was the sort of thing where you said, hey, Devin Neal, I think, had somewhere around 12 carries right around the start of the fourth quarter. I can't remember if that was after a fourth quarter carry or heading into the fourth quarter. I would understand at that point if you said, you know what, we were saving his legs and now we're going to ride Devin Neal from this point. But that never happened. And then with how much Illinois had the ball in the second half and in that fourth quarter in particular, Nick, they were 6 of 15 on third downs for the game. They were 4 of 4 with the game on the line, on that drive that they had, to score the points that put them up. Then that final drive to kind of run out the clock. Kansas couldn't get them off the field defensively. Defense was great in this game. I think the one area where there's maybe a slight bit of concern, just because we're talking about the whole picture here and talking about things moving forward, the pass rush. Right? You on one hand, you wanted to keep Altmaier in the pocket. You didn't want to get hurt by him as much as a runner. On the other hand, you got 2 sacks, one of which was Marvin Grant coming totally clean on a blitz. The other of which was a coverage sack, 6 or 8 seconds after the snap where he kind of looked to run. You had somebody there, he backed off, and then you had multiple guys kind of finish him off. And so when it's 3rd and 10 and you're in Manhattan and you have to get a stop, who's going to get the sack at that point? I think that's the ever so slight concern from the defense in a game where, like I said, the defense played really well. Offensively, Kansas needs to kind of go back to the drawing board. And I'm glad that Al said that about Caleb Taylor, because Caleb Taylor was terrific. I really thought, for a guy that wasn't there last week against Lindenwood, he was really physical. He made a couple plays in the backfield. That defensive tackle group as a whole, I think, has a chance to be really good. I thought the linebackers were generally excellent tonight. The defense as a whole was pretty good. Offensively, they need to figure out, hey, was this a one-off situation? And even then, how do you build off of that to make it to where your best players are doing the things that make them your best players?
Yeah, my biggest positive takeaway is what Al said here. Marvin Grant is that dude. He was phenomenal in this game. You mentioned the sack he had. He had a couple of really, really quality tackles as well. He was all over the place. It felt like every time you were looking, he was involved in a tackle or involved in a play. Marvin Grant was very, very impressive for me. That was by far my biggest positive takeaway from really the entire game was, okay, Marvin Grant is that guy, right? Like there was so much questions about, well, what are we going to do with no Craig Young? Like how is KU going to fill the loss of Craig Young? I don't think that's even a question anymore. You have a guy like Marvin Grant that certainly has a different skill set than what Craig Young had, but he still effectively fills that role, I think, at a very high level. So Marvin Grant, huge shout out to him for the game that he had as well. And yeah, Al also in the comments mentioning that DJ Warner got on the field early and often. He was out there very early, which
almost had a sack, had Altmaier in his grasp, and Altmaier kind of stepped through it, but it was still a nice play for sure. I think, you had that. Dylan Wudke made a really good play, near the end as well. Dean Miller obviously was one of the guys that combined on that sack. And I'll be frank, Nick, what I worried most about with Dean Miller was, hey, what's going to happen when Illinois just says, you know what, you're 235 pounds. We're going to line up and we're going to run the ball. And I thought the defensive line as a whole, and that includes Dean Miller, they held up really well in that situation.
Yeah. Appreciate everybody joining us live here tonight on our YouTube show. Thanks so much to everyone in the comment section as well. Be sure to subscribe. We'll be talking KU all throughout the season. I wanted to circle back to this comment earlier that we got from Kieran Bateman about this play on the muffed punt touchback play that happened. So you're right. The announcers they were a bit confused. And then the announcer tried to ask Dean Blandino, the rules guy, about it. And he asked it completely wrong. And so then Dean Blandino was gave this non-answer. So basically, my understanding is essentially that it was muffed, so the possession never changed. And then it was a Kansas player that actually knocked the ball back into the end zone. It wasn't an Illinois player. And so because there was no real change of possession and Illinois recovered it in the end zone on a play where it wasn't them moving it back, that's why it became a touchback, I think. But yeah, I agree that the broadcast did not do a very good job of explaining really what occurred there on that play per se. But yeah, the defense obviously was the highlight. We talked about Marvin Grant. But yeah, DJ Warner got on the field quite a bit, made some plays, and yeah, they put Kansas in position to still win this game. And I think going into the season, especially with Jalen Daniels being back fully healthy, everyone would have said of the two units, you would expect the offense to be better, and that has not been the case up to this point. So that's a bit I don't know, maybe disappointing is not the right term for it. And by the way, Mo, I do agree. It seems like a kind of a horrible rule that that they would have it that way. Football, unfortunately, even in the year 2024, has some very antiquated things about it, and I think that might be one of them. But yeah, I wanted to circle back to Jeff Grimes a little bit more about the play calling. I mean, where do you think things went wrong, Kevin? And where I mean, I guess where does KU go from here going forward after a game like this?
It's kind of funny because I feel like we talked on one of our preseason shows and said basically, don't be shocked when Kansas is in a 3rd and long and you get a screen pass, right? That was something that he ran at Baylor quite a bit. Another thing was, reverses and jet sweeps. The unfortunate thing about Quentin Skinner putting that ball on the turf, that thing was set up. And I know some people, are going to say, oh my gosh, like, why would you do that? You're running the ball well conventionally. It was there. If Quentin Skinner held onto that ball and got going forward, that was going to be a really big play. I think the disappointing thing to me is you can have a bad quarter, a bad half, whatever, calling a game where things aren't working maybe the way you thought they would. Maybe you thought the defense would line up a certain way or react to what you usually do in a certain way. But at some point, you get that feel for, okay, this is what we need to do to win this game. And I think for a lot of us watching, you felt that the best way to win this game was to hand the ball off to Devin Neal in particular. And so you kept waiting sort of for that next step to happen. I thought, on one or two of the touchdown drives, I thought Grimes called the drives pretty well, but it wasn't something that was sustained where it was like, okay, you found this thing that you can just keep on exploiting over and over again and ride that game out. You think about the UNLV game and the bowl game, right, where UNLV had that thing a little close for comfort for Kansas in the 4th quarter, but Kansas was able to go back to some things that they knew they could hit on and wound up winning with a little bit more comfort. I think this is a game that, quite frankly, Nick, Kansas probably should have won by double digits. And that maybe even with the turnovers, if Kansas comes into that 4th quarter, you've already had the interceptions and you say, you know what, we're going to live and die with the running game. So far, we've been living with it. I'm not sure Kansas doesn't live with it at that point, that you don't grind everything down, grind the defense down, get more points, go up 10 points. And who knows what happens at that point with maybe a little bit more refreshed defense as well. And so I think that's maybe the disappointing part is from a game state perspective, you can say, okay, maybe this wasn't the bad call. This wasn't the bad call. Yeah, Al, that's what we brought up in the first couple minutes was the Devin Neal running for 7 to start off kind of the 4th quarter possession and then taking 2 deep shots down the field. That would have seemed like a really good time to continue to establish the running game and going from there.
Yeah. We're going to talk more about this game and kind of dive a little bit deeper into it, what went wrong, maybe look forward a little bit to how KU can turn this thing around after a short break. They're going to tell you about our sponsors at Home Field Apparel. You can go to homefieldapparel.com, get a bunch of different KU items, check out over the other 150 schools. I saw some Illinois fans in the chat. Home Field Apparel has Illinois, and you can use promo code PAY24 for 15% off. Listen, if somebody from another school gave me a promo code to save money, I'm still doing it. So if you're an Illinois fan checking out the chat, go over to homefieldapparel.com and get 15% off your first order with PayHeed24. We're back in just a moment.
We appreciate you supporting KC Sports Network by listening to our podcast. You have helped us become the highest ranked Chiefs podcast network in 2022 and 2023. And don't forget about our daily Substack newsletter, the best written analysis you can find on the Chiefs straight to your inbox every day. kcsn.substack.com.
This is the Paid Podcast live for the first time post-game of KU and Illinois. Once again, thank you so much to everyone that is watching us live and in the chat as well. Keep giving your comments, sharing your thoughts as we'll talk more about this game as well here. I'm Nick Springer along with Kevin Flaherty. Be sure to subscribe for more KU content all throughout the rest of this football season as well here on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jocks KCSN. Listen, I'm pretty sad. If you're in the chat, you're probably pretty sad as well. I got $500 maybe to try to cheer you up. You could go to bluewirepods.com/survey and complete the Blue Wire audience survey about you and your podcast listening habits for a chance to win a $500 gift card. The survey will help create a better advertising experience for audiences and in turn help our show here on Payheat. That's bluewirepods.com/survey, where all you have to do is answer some simple questions for a chance to win $500. Make sure to read the full terms and disclaimer, plus complete the survey for a chance to win. That's bluewirepods.com/survey, and the link is also in the show notes of this episode. Yeah, a tough loss for Kansas, 23-17. They lose on the road against Illinois. Illinois storms the field, which was a really bizarre thing to watch because, that's against Kansas. You're storming the field against Kansas. That's kind of crazy. Not to throw shade at Illinois at all. It was just kind of it's just one of those things where you don't expect to be on the other side of that, I guess, if you're KU. So that was a bit surprising. But obviously this was a huge win for Illinois. We kind of mentioned it off air, Kevin, before we got started here tonight, though, in that Illinois didn't really do anything that was particularly surprising or impressive. I mean, they had a couple of nice catches on the sideline. You had the Zachary Franklin one-handed catch that he made in the first half. They had a couple other good catches. Franklin was really good for Illinois, quite frankly. But other than that, the offense for Illinois wasn't overly impressive. And the defense, even though, KU was able to move the ball, even though we've kind of talked quite a bit about some of the issues with passing and the play calling, KU had success moving the ball, but they just committed turnovers with some bad interceptions. So it's a really tough loss, and it's one that you might look back on later in the season and think, man, you really let one slip there.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's why people are so frustrated about it is while Kansas has had some games that have gotten away from them, you look at the Oklahoma State game, you look at the Texas Tech game, the K-State game from a year ago. I think most of those you don't blame, and blaming the coaching is maybe the wrong way to put it, but you don't necessarily see they should have done this when they did this. You felt like, yeah, maybe they lost, maybe a player made a mistake, but it was still a little bit different than the way that this one fell. And I thought Jesse Newell at the Kansas City Star put it perfectly in that he said, for a decade plus, Kansas has been trying to scheme around other teams being better up front than they are. In this game, Kansas was significantly better up front and wound up losing the game anyway. You wind up with 9 tackles for loss. 3 of them went to Cornell Wheeler, who I think, also had the forced fumble on that play. It stunk, obviously, to have the touchdown called back on the pick play. Was another play that maybe didn't seem like, at the end, it didn't seem like it was as big a deal because there were so many other things to talk about. But 7 points is 7 points. And in a close game, that can be a major difference. In that final drive, Kansas faced third downs of, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 12, and 3rd and 6 that they gave up conversions to. And if any of those get stopped, and again, we're not saying the defense is the reason. We're just saying if 1 or 2 of these things go a different way, you've got a lot more time there at the end. You're not necessarily heaving up a Hail Mary, you've got a lot more of a chance to get into field goal range to tie that thing up. Illinois maybe wouldn't have added that field goal late. And so there were a lot of things. One of the really frustrating things about this game is it's one of those games where you look at it and you say, these 10 things had to go wrong for Kansas to lose this game. There's no way all 10 of them are going to go wrong. And what happened, Nick? All those things went wrong, whether it was the touchdown being called back on the pick play, whether it was the muffed punt not getting recovered, whether it was giving up, whether it was, the interceptions, the not calling the run game enough, all of those different things, the pick six on a screenplay. One of the deep shots that Jalen Daniels threw an interception on was early. Wasn't it a first down that he was throwing downfield? Just eat that ball. Yeah. You got 2 more downs. And so literally all of those things had to go wrong, and all of them did, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, on top of all that, you kind of touched on something as well, in that KU was the more talented team. Like, as this game unfolded, you're watching and you're saying KU has the better talent. Like, they are the more talented team. And you mentioned it, obviously for the past decade plus, that's pretty much never been the case that KU is the more talented team. But to go on the road and to feel like you're the more talented team and to still struggle and to still, have those issues that you kind of outlined, really compounds that level of frustration of, man, we really have this one. We're the better team. If we could just execute a little bit more, have a couple things go our way a little bit more, this shouldn't have even been a close game. To me, the pick six at the end of the first half was a real turning point, because KU had been in control of the game in the first half. I think that's a safe way to put it. They were pretty much in control. You're up 10-6. You get the ball back with 1:05 remaining in the first half. At that point, worst case scenario, you should be going into half up 10-6, right? Like, either if you want to just run the ball and kill the clock and go to half up 10-6, that's fine, whatever. But you can't afford to have a play like that to really flip the momentum of the half. And that really hurt Kansas. They did bounce back, though, and eventually regained the lead. But even still, that was such a critical moment late in the first half that was really given away. An interesting point here made by Travis in the chat, which I find kind of intriguing, is that I don't really know if you could call this rust, what we saw tonight from Jalen Daniels. I don't know if you could call it rust. He just didn't have it, which is something that we haven't seen really very much of. Now, obviously, he hasn't played very much in the past couple of years due to injury, but yeah, it was very bizarre. He did not have that sort of magic, for lack of a better term, that we've seen him have in the past. And I think for the sideline of Kansas and for the coaching staff to maybe not recognize that and try to pivot the offensive game plan a little bit is really where I am left a bit confused. Is, okay, these deep shots are not necessarily working out that well. The run game has been effective. KU ends up rushing for over 100 yards more than Illinois, and still it's not enough. And still it feels like you left a significant amount of rushing yards on the table, really, that you could have had way more with Devin Neal. So that's the thing for me. Is like, I mentioned it earlier in the show, but man, there are just certain games where you realize this is a game where we need to lean on our biggest X factor. And in this case, in this game, it was Devin Neal. He was having great runs. I mean, he had a 4-yard run where I was like totally dazzled. It was like, that was the most incredible 4-yard run I've ever seen. Like, can we give him the ball a little bit more? And it just didn't happen for KU. So that's really the biggest bummer.
Yeah, can we talk about one of the few positives, though? I know nobody wants to talk about positives after a game like this, but what was the question mark we had on offense heading into this one? It was the offensive line, right? And I thought the way the offensive line played, Jalen Daniels, for the most part, had significant amount of time to throw the ball. They ran the ball well. And so maybe that's not quite the question mark that we thought going in, where some of those position battles needed to be decided sort of in the final weeks. They flipped some guys around, but yeah, it's there were positives to take out of this, but at the same time, nobody's going to want to hear that, because this is a game that was right there. It was on a platter. Even with how poorly you played, you get the ball back up 17-13 in the fourth quarter with a chance to with a chance to, I don't want to say put it away, but really put Illinois behind the 8 ball, and just didn't do it.
Yeah, just to be clear, some people in the chat still talking about Jeff Grimes. Jeff Grimes is A, he's not going anywhere. I can assure you that. But B, I don't know. Maybe there should have been more. Maybe we should be giving more of a grace period to him in terms of kind of meshing with this offense. I'm sure people don't want to hear, a Jeff Grimes apologist, which I'm not saying I am at this moment, but I don't know. Maybe there is still that issue of chemistry, right? I mean, you're talking about a coaching staff with Lance Leipold and Brian Borland and Andy Kolnicki, who had been together for so long. You bring in an outside influence, with guys that have been together. Maybe there is a bit more of chafing there than originally anticipated, of kind of hopefully having a seamless transition. But yeah, he's not going anywhere, and I expect that he will get it ironed out. I mean, we've talked to Jeff Grimes, we've heard from him. Jeff Grimes is a football guy through and through.
Yes.
I don't think you'll meet anybody that is more of a football guy than he is. So I'm expecting that he's going to be round the clock working to figure this out and recognize, okay, hey, if the game is flowing this way, even if I do feel like I want to get the receivers involved or I want to get the pass game going, at the end of the day, if handing it off to Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw is working and moving the ball, that's okay, right? That's okay. So I don't know. Just wanted to kind of put that to bed, though. Obviously, Jeff Grimes is not going anywhere. It's been 2 games, so you can definitely. I mean, on the panic meter, we have gone way. We're breaking the meter at that point. If we're thinking after 2 games that Jeff Grimes might be gone, but yeah, I think there are certain things that you can look back on this game and say we needed Devin Neal more. Certainly, right?
Well, the funny thing is, could Grimes ever have been accused of not running the ball enough before? No,
I mean, he had a top 5 rushing offense.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think if you talk to BYU fans and then talk to Baylor fans, they'd say, man, there were some times we really would have liked to get the ball in the air a little bit more than we did it. And I think that's one of the interesting things about it, but also one of the reasons that I feel like things could change in the future is if this is a team that, quite frankly, they have to line up and really run the ball to be effective, if the passing game isn't going to be there, if, God forbid, and I'm knocking on this wood desk in front of me so nobody can accuse me of jinxing this, if for whatever reason, there is something wrong with Jalen where he's not 100%, I think Grimes is probably one of the offensive coordinators you want in your boat to say, hey, let's run the ball. That's something that he has a big background in, and I really think that's something that it would not surprise me at all to see Kansas against UNLV kind of lining up and tapping into the more physical stuff a week from now.
AB brings up a great point here in the chat as well. Dude, Lance Leipold was absolutely on one tonight. I mean, it was not even 50 seconds into the game, and they cut to him just going ballistic. It was crazy. I was talking about this before. I just one time, just one time, I want the camera to cut to Lance Leipold, and I want to see him smile. Just one time. One time.
The best part about that, though, Nick, and I hate to give announcers too hard of a time because they're switching teams every week or whatever else, but when they said, oh, you don't usually see Lance get fired up like this, I was like, have you guys seen a Kansas football game in the past? It doesn't matter the game, any game. Go to Lindenwood a week ago, and you probably saw Lance down there chewing some refs out. I mean, it's that whole, it's not a bug, it's a feature. It is a feature of Lance Leipold that he is usually chewing some rear on the officials at some point during just about every game. But that cracked me up, that comment, like, whoa, I can't believe that Lance Leipold is chewing out this official. It's like, really? You can't believe that?
Mr. Monkey clarifies that his Firegrounds was a joke. So there you go.
He said pretty much though. I love that. I love the way he hedged that at the end. That's one of those things where somebody says, are you serious? And it's that, yeah, no, yeah, or no, yeah, no type thing where
very much
a little bit open-ended.
Yeah, very much appreciate everybody in the chat tonight joining us live here on the postgame show for KU losing against Illinois. Okay, let's take a step back here and kind of zoom out and think about this big picture wise.
Sure.
Kansas is 1-1, right? You're 1-1. You're about to be taking on a UNLV team that put up 72 points, by the way, earlier today. I know it was against Utah Tech, but
that game was wild. There were 3 touchdowns, and they went both ways. UNLV scored 2, and Utah Tech, I think, was who they were playing, scored 1. There were 3 touchdowns in the first 4 minutes, Nick. Like, a lot of people probably hadn't even, hit their seats yet. They're grabbing the hot dog. They're like, yeah, I'm going to walk in with my pop. And it's like, oh, my God, it's 14-7 already.
Yeah, a chaotic game for UNLV, but UNLV looks like they're going to be a formidable opponent for KU, to be honest, coming into Children's Mercy Park. So you have that to keep in mind. I mean, Lance Leipold kind of touched on it in his post-game press conference, his brief post-game press conference that wrapped up earlier, in which hey, look, we're going to find out who we are as a team, right? And I think that's a fair point. KU is going to need to do some soul searching over the next 5.5 days, essentially, right? And we had talked about this in our preseason episode, which is KU just played, right? It's a Saturday night. You just played in Illinois. You're going to be getting back probably to Lawrence a very late Saturday night or even early Sunday morning, possibly in the morning hours. And then you have to turn around and you're going to be playing UNLV on a Friday night. So you're going to be coming on short rest against UNLV. Obviously, UNLV played today as well, but Kansas played at night versus UNLV playing earlier in the day. UNLV plays in a high-octane offense. This is going to be a potentially tough turnaround for Kansas that I think you do need to be concerned about a little bit if you're KU. So hopefully, Kansas fans will show up. The first game at Children's Mercy Park, Al said it perfectly. The first game at Children's Mercy Park, Kansas fans showed up, and they made it into a really good environment. They'll need to do that again, certainly against UNLV. And then looking even bigger picture here, beyond this upcoming game and into the rest of the season, you're 1-1, like I said. But in terms of the bigger picture stuff, this was a non-conference game. Even Lance Leipold mentioned it as a non-conference loss. So in terms of maybe some of the goals that this Kansas team still has, season long wise, you're not out of it entirely, but this is certainly a moment where you need to hit the reset button, because this was a game in which it felt like you were there. It felt like you had the more talent, like we mentioned, and you just couldn't make a play to really secure it on the road. And, this is one where you don't want things to snowball, right? You've got clearly a tuned up UNLV team coming up. Then you're going to be going on the road to West Virginia as well. So there's no rest for the weary. No rest for the weary, essentially, for KU in terms of trying to figure things out quickly and hopefully turning it around and getting ready for UNLV and the rest of the season.
Yeah, I thought Lance Leipold made a really good point when he said all our goals are still there for us. And, if anybody saw like our season preview episode, I picked Kansas to go 10-2. Nick, your one
I
loss,
to go 11-1.
One loss is out of the way.
Oh my gosh!
Nick picked 11-1, which my point there was not to hammer on Nick and be like, obviously you're going to be wrong.
No, yeah, obviously that guy's an idiot.
My point was more to say, if Kansas is going to be 10-2, it probably wasn't going to reach the college football playoff as an at-large team, right? The way that Kansas gets to the playoff is by winning the Big 12. Kansas hasn't played a Big 12 game yet, and there's a little bit of time to kind of try to try to figure things out and go back to the drawing board a little bit. I think Travis made a really good point there, in that if you've got a good defense and you've got a good offensive line, that's a heck of a place to start. And so this was a game that, even with all the mistakes, Kansas was right there. This was a winnable game for them. And you clean up some of the things. You don't turn the ball over. You get the ball to the right guys in the right spots. Things could look vastly different even a week from now. But I think the big thing is just that even with this toe stub, all of those goals are still out there for them, one. But two, Nick, maybe the best thing that Lance Leipold has done in this whole program building is he almost always has Kansas focused that very next week, right? The losses that you thought, oh my gosh, that could lead to 2 losses because it's gonna kind of cripple them in terms of the way that they approach it or the energy or whatever else. That hasn't happened. And when they've had a big game and you said, hey, they're due maybe for a big letdown, typically come back out and play pretty well. He's very good at compartmentalizing each game as they go along. And so it's a game that guys are going to have a bad taste in their mouth when they get home. And, they may have a bad taste in their mouth depending on how practice goes, early in the week and how film goes. But it's going to be flushed by the time that they play UNLV. I like the point about Children's Mercy Park being a great home field advantage. Nick and I, our seats at Children's Mercy for media stuff, it's actually outside. And one of the reasons that I think I enjoyed it, I can't speak for Nick. Maybe Nick hated it and would rather have been anywhere else in the world. But one of the reasons that I liked those seats was because we got a feel for what the atmosphere was, maybe more than some of the people who were in the press box. And I agree. I thought it was a really good atmosphere. I thought it played up a lot louder than, what the overall attendance was because of the acoustics in that stadium. It's a really intimate environment to watch football. And so there's a chance here for Kansas to come back, and if they come out and play well in that one, it would be a pretty strong statement that they're back on the right track just a week later.
AB with an interesting question here, talking about the road environment of Illinois compared to what KU will have to deal with the rest of the schedule. I think obviously K-State you expect to be the toughest environment Kansas is going to play in. Then you look at probably BYU there, in Provo. Will be a tough environment for Kansas, I think.
West Virginia is really tough too.
I think those are probably
I had
the top
a Big 12
three.
coach tell me once that there are only two environments in the Big 12 where you actually fear for your life, and one is in Morgantown, where it feels like they aren't just rooting on their team. They're hoping for actual physical harm to come to you. West Virginia is one of those. The other one, by the way, Kansas does not play at this year. That's in Lubbock, and so I always found that kind of interesting. So, but I think you're right on the right track. And I'm sorry I cut you off on that, Nick, because I think you're right there with me in that it's K-State, because that place is going to be an absolute beehive. And then I think it's either West Virginia or BYU. West Virginia because it's probably the better atmosphere. BYU because the altitude combined with the atmosphere and everything, those are going to be some really tough road environments to go into.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, K-State number one, both agree there. BYU, West Virginia, probably the next two, and then maybe Illinois would then slot in there with the environment they had tonight as maybe the fourth toughest. I mean, yeah. I'm not expecting much from Arizona State, to be quite honest. And then Baylor, with it being late in the season, Baylor maybe checked out at that point. They took another tough loss today against Utah, so they may have a new head coach at that point or an interim coach. Who knows? So I'm not expecting much from that environment either. So there's going to be – the point being, KU is going to have some tougher environments to deal with this season. And that's kind of another point about this is I mentioned it earlier. This is a senior-laden Kansas team, so you hope that they can handle these environments well. But obviously tonight it didn't really work out for them. So a very frustrating loss. But on the flip side, when you think about the senior leadership that this Kansas team has, okay, after a loss, let's see it. Let's see that leadership, right? Let's see the players sort of respond positively to this and respond in the correct way to correct what they need to do, right? I mean, Travis brings a great point here, right? Regroup, reassess, and get back on track and look forward. So that's going to be the most important thing for Kansas with I think a UNLV team that looks a lot scarier now than maybe they did even just a couple months ago in the offseason when you were thinking about UNLV at Children's Mercy Park. I think they definitely look scarier now for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be another game where you're going to have to worry about a mobile quarterback, with Sluka being a guy that, actually set records for rushing yards at his previous stop. And I saw today he had like a 30-yard touchdown, something like that. I don't remember what the actual yardage was on the run, but a quarterback that can take off. He's not, the most accurate guy. When you look at percentages and things like that, it would be a really nice game for your secondary to bounce back, maybe get a turnover or two. And like you were saying, and like people have been saying in the chat, if Kansas regroups and reassesses and comes out with a big win in that game, it's going to feel like everything is back on track. And you're going to say, gosh, I wish they didn't drop that Illinois game. But at the same time, it's all still going to be on the table for them.
Yeah, and listen, if you were dreaming about the college football playoff for this Kansas team, Yeah, that dream took a pretty big hit, but it's certainly not out the window, right? I mean, people maybe probably don't want to hear that after a game like tonight, but it's not out the window in terms of big picture, right? So that's kind of what it's what I sort of circle back to. French fries here with a comment as well, talking about Coach Z, and this was something that was discussed quite a bit earlier in the week with Coach Grimes and Coach Zabrowski, and how they communicate with Grimes on the sideline and Zabrowski in the press box. So it's Grimes calling the plays to Zabrowski, who then relays them to Jalen Daniels, basically from up top. So that's just how it works. I don't know if that'll continue. The one thing, somebody else had a comment earlier about KU possibly promoting Zabrowski. I don't know if maybe that just wasn't in the cards. Maybe Zabrowski, I don't know. It's something to keep an eye on. So Lance did have some good sound bites on the presser, by the way. Thanks to Al. And also shout out to Kent Swanson joining in the chat here. Thanks, Kent, for being here after a pain.
That's pretty accurate right there.
Yeah, tough loss for Kansas, 23-17 against Illinois. Kansas had plenty of chances, plenty of opportunities, unable to capitalize, and it's a tough one to swallow. And it's really tough to see your opponent storming the field against you, something that KU has certainly not seen previously. So disappointing loss for KU, to say the least. I think that'll about wrap it up. Any other thoughts you want to get out of here, Kevin, before we get out of here tonight?
No, I mean, Kent pretty much hit it with his one-word comment. What's the saying? Eloquent in its brevity, in terms of what he was saying. But Kansas will not be lacking for motivation heading into UNLV. And I think that's going to be something that's either going to pay off or it isn't. And I know that sounds like, well, no duh or whatever. But I really do think, like you said, you've got 30 seniors on this team. It's an experienced team. You've got leadership supposedly at every level of this team. If that really plays out, now is when you're going to see that play out, when they regroup and get everybody focused on the task at hand.
Once again, a huge thank you to everyone that joined us live tonight in the chat. Huge shout out to everybody, Al, AB, some of the guys, Travis, that were in the chat throughout the night tonight, tuning into the show after a tough loss for Kansas. Thank you to you guys for supporting us. Be sure to subscribe. Be sure to leave a like. Be sure to tell your friends and spread the word about us here on the Payee Podcast and also on the Kansas City Sports Network. Be sure to check all that out as well. We're going to be back later this week, probably in the middle of the week, to give a little bit more of a detailed breakdown of KU and Illinois as we look ahead to that game ahead on Friday night back at Children's Mercy Park. Last game at Children's Mercy Park before we start playing at Arrowhead as well. So thanks so much, everybody in the chat, for as always. And again, be on the lookout for our preview of KU and Illinois coming up, or KU and UNLV, I should say, coming up later this week. Until then, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See you guys.